challenge, and on the next segment, I'm hit on this education gap.
Yeah, that's good.
And
yeah.
We end up with solutions.
Yeah, that's good. This is good information.
Yeah. But I was mentioning, I have this colleague, she was accepted into a fellowship at Columbia University.
Thank you very much.
And it sounds simple to us to understand social structure in those institutions.
Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's talking about the influences of social structure on human development. Doctor, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we would give you an opportunity to talk about some of the institutions and some of the things that influence social structure, that influence human development. And let's start off now by giving you that opportunity.
Okay, thank you again. In the last segment, we actually named 10 of the major institutions that make up society. And I think the listening audience or us can always give some thought, but just kind of contextualize the fact that there are those institutions and how we are indeed from birth to where we are right now and going forth very much impacted. For instance, at any given time, we are government/politics influenced. At any time, when we think of the institution of medicine, how we are indeed influenced. If you just think about the institution of the military, we take for granted in many instances that we drive, walk, go wherever we want to go and feel free. So these things influence the society in which we live in. But I want us, given those 10 major institutions, to now look at human development. And I would like to cite Dr. Jean Piaget. He has these 4 cognitive development stages. And I want us to give some thought to the institutions and how where we are socially located end up impacting our cognitive development. His first developmental stage he refers to as the sensory motor stage, and that's from birth to age 2. And I would like to take it a little further from a theoretical point of view for the listening audience to challenge us with some of the problems we have, and even during the conception of 9 months of pregnancy leading to birth are very important for us to eat healthy, to exercise correctly, to see the physical physicians and making appointments, and doing everything that's appropriate during that time for a good, healthy birth. But he indicates that there's something that's going on with the human development even during that sensory motor stage. Now, we need to understand just the senses, and after birth, that those are the things that influence a particular child. So the challenge is, how can we then make a very nurturing environment from birth through the age 2 that a child can learn and develop? And those institutions, the family, having medication, religion, any of them that you can think of will indicate to us that there is some influence going on during that first sensory motor stage. I try to share that we don't need to whip or spank during birth to age 2 because we're dealing primarily with the senses. So many people think that when they tell a little child from birth to 2 to stop doing something that they understand to stop doing and they want to spank them. But they don't. They're just relating to their senses over and over again. You should have that stimulated. So the second developmental stage is referred to as the pre-operational stage. That's from 2 to this large range of age of 7. At this particular time, kids can start to understand our influence by what is in their surroundings. They can start understanding colors. When people start reading Dr. Seuss, they can stories to them. They can start identifying with mom, dad, and others at this particular cognitive developmental stage. We're thinking about reasoning at this point, nothing else but reasoning. And that's a long developmental stage. So to the degree that we understand the influences of social structure, we can do that in a very positive way, say leading into preparation for kindergarten and elementary school. The third operational cognitive developmental stage is that of the concrete. And that goes from 7 to roughly 12 years old. This is where kids can add, multiply, subtract, divide. They understand issues of cause and effect to a certain degree. And during this particular concrete developmental stage, they know right from wrong. They know not to run out into the street if a car is coming. In those early developmental stages, they do not understand those things. The last one is that it's called the formal operational stage at the age of 12 throughout adulthood to where we are and ongoing right now. This says that we have the ability in our cognitive development, our minds, our reasoning ability to be able to think abstractly, to understand a theory, to be able to discuss things and understand the consequences of them, to have cause-effect type of understanding. If I do well in school, I can then be able to prepare myself to go to law school, to graduate school, or to work and to work effectively. That I put this amount of effort in and I can have that outcome. So now, why am I bringing all of this up? I'm trying to link it back to the influence of social structure, thinking if families understood this, then they can place a strong emphasis on the sensory motor stage from birth to age 2 in a different way to try to close an educational gap. If there are certain differences that I'm hoping to get to in the next segment of those gaps that are out there, I'm theorizing very strongly for listening audience that from 0 to 2 is a very important time to do a lot of reading to your child, exposing them to positive effects, allowing them to be able to explore and doing those things in a very positive way at that particular sensory motor from birth to age 2 that leads into 7 to 12.
And so in a real sense, Dr. Sanford, all of these things, these are human developments,
Yes.
which is to say that no matter where humanity might be, that these are the situations that sociologists have said that all humankind in a real sense respond to those developments, those stages that you're talking about. Is that what we're saying here?
That's exactly what we are saying. And that these stages of human development is just so important. And I will reiterate it a little bit later, but the reason I'm stressing so strong the social structure, because we look at the institution of economics, where we are socially located at birth, we call that ascribed status. But as we have opportunities to go into school and work very hard, we can achieve certain levels of occupational opportunities and success in life. But if we understand that model that I've just laid out with Piaget and spend time in reading, we can close the gaps in not doing well in school. But if we don't do those things and don't understand it, then we have a tendency to find in kindergarten, and by the time we take the first standardized test, the scores are still low.
And so in a real sense, Dr. Sanford, we've got 45 seconds before the end of this period. But what you're saying here is that the idea that we should provide some kind of information, education, and et cetera, in the preschool area is very, very important in terms of helping to enhance, in a real sense, the development of our children in those areas.
Absolutely.
Preschool is not something just for nursery.
That's right.
It's important in terms of how things develop.
Absolutely.
Okay, and what we'll do, we'll take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. A lot of folks don't seem to believe that that's important,
right.
you know, and Head Start and all of those things. That's the very, very foundation in terms of what a child will experience. And people have a hard time understanding that.
You look at our community, like if you leave here today or during the summer ride down the street from here, go down Jeff Street, you see all our kids out in the street trying to get a donation. You look at the people that do well in school, they're reading about 15 or 20 books over the summer. They do well, you know, if you did that with your granddaughter, and then you see the success. And what we have a tendency to do is over the summer think it is vacation. It's not a vacation.
That's right.
And so when you see the differences, it's not having anything to do genetically with our capability, is that they're spending more time doing
whatever they're supposed to do, whatever humanity in a real sense tells them that they should do. The human experience says that children ought to do this, whatever.
And family needs to know that.
Understand. Yeah, well, that's good. I'm glad. Yeah, I like that. I like that.
That's what I'm trying to get into, and I'm taking this back.
Now, this is the last segment here.
This total last segment?
This is 10 minutes.
Okay.
Last 10
all right,
minutes.
all right.
We've done the first two segments.
Yeah, okay.
You know,
fast.
I go so. We did do the.
Yeah, we done too.
6-8. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is the last one. 10 minutes. I can do this one.
Yeah, this year, you know, sitting up here just going through one or
Yeah.
another, I become confused in terms of what is this the first, the second, and the third?
Yeah.
No, but this is the third. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's giving us some information in reference to the influence of social structure on human development. And Dr. Sanford, as we said earlier, it seems like such a very esoteric kind of topic, you see, a sociological kind of topic, but essentially I think the way you're laying out the information here is that this is real basic kind of information. If our audience can understand that information and apply it, they will be able to not only improve their own lives, but the lives of others as well. Let's do it from that perspective.
Okay, and thanks again. And you're so right. Just to recap, social structure influences human development, and I've laid out Piaget's 4 cognitive development stages. And now what I would like to try to do is to share some information as to prior to 1960, very little studies was done on the educational gap. As we may very well know, there are a lot of thinking about social structure, how it was formulated here in America with 244 years of enslavement, 81 years of Jim Crow laws that led into 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson that brought about things that were totally segregated. And that was the law of the land. And if you think about millions of people born into that social structure, torn up families, torn up economics, things totally inequitable and unfair, leading into the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education. How would you then make a comparison between the educational gap of those that the social structure was not that way and inequitable throughout their entire lives, generation from generation, in comparison to other ethnic groups, and African Americans in particular, that had to experience it. So prior to 1960, there was very little research, but Dr. James S. Coleman in 1966 did a classic study on looking at the educational gap between African Americans and European Americans. And now what I'm suggesting here today, looking at social structure, it was set up in America where there was a lot of inequalities that existed. Poverty, having laws that did not allow a particular ethnic group to have equal access to education. So what he found in the study was simply this, that one, there was a big educational gap between African Americans and European Americans. 2, he found that the resources that were involved in school systems, because things were segregated, certainly made a difference. He also found that socioeconomic status, if there were African Americans and other ethnic groups that had financial and educational, social structural types of influences early in their life, regardless of the situations of segregation, their children paired and did fairly well. So socioeconomic status made a difference. And then the last was indeed the notion that if families were successful and were present, their children had an opportunity to be successful as well. However, when you look at that study or that gap and you fast forward to today, the gap is still there. Educationally and looking at standardized tests, high dropout rates for African American males and not finishing high school, success in college. So we still have the social structural type of a problem that is so systemic. It's ingrained in the very social structure of society or the institutions of our society. So what I'm trying to suggest in laying out social structures, understanding that for generations, if culture is something that is passed down from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, well, what has happened to the family when it was destroyed within one ethnic group, African Americans? What would happen when laws were put out for education was not equitable? What happens when you had to work for hundreds of years for nothing, so you didn't have an economic stability? in comparison to others. So now when you fast forward to the present, some of those same circumstances still are present within our societal social system today that still bring about that gap. So while many might feel that if we, as President Obama has done, he saw this as a problem, I'm sure, when he tried to make it a national issue of letting everybody have an equal access to kindergarten through the first grade to look at that first, third grade test. But what I'm proposing today is to suggest that, according to Piaget, we have to inform the institution of families that they must be very aware that in that first developmental, cognitive developmental stage of the sensory motor stage, from birth to age 2, emphasis must be placed on the senses, reading to them, making sure they live in a secure environment, that you're engaging them in a very positive way with positive reinforcement and not spankings. As they develop through that from then 2 to 7 and then enter the first grade with this type of access. Programs that are out there during the summer that you're engaging with them over that little short period of time in educational opportunities. There are programs that families can get them involved in, from Head Start, if you can afford it, to get them into camps or church, the institution of religion. Churches involved in this issue of that gap. Families are making sure that their children are getting involved into educational or camps during the summer. Not sports camps, nothing wrong with that, but educational camps. We're trying to close this gap on that third grade test. How can you do that? We have to understand that we need to do something early and prepare for kindergarten as we get into first, second, and third grade. And the next time they take the test, to take an SAT or ACT to then go on to college. Because that gap, as it was in the 60s, is still very present, if not the same, probably worse today than then. So well, we have to deal with that.
Dr. Sanford, and traveling around as you do among sociologists and people who do wish to reconstruct your American society, what would be your suggestions in terms of how we might be able to greater reinforce some of the ideas you're talking about today?
Well, it's interesting you brought that up, because a colleague, another sociologist, and myself and others are working on a very interesting project that we're hoping that will try to help this problem, at least be an intervention in this issue. Dr. Levi Jones, a noted sociologist, a former colleague of yours, still is, and good friend, thinking in terms of a research school that goes into all of the 50 urban areas throughout the United States. And we study the internal operations of the schools and what is a best fit for those schools, and how out of that you can have an experimental group and control group where you can see what are the best practices, the lessons learned, and then go forth with having all of the schools throughout urban areas in the United States to be able to have better models for then educating the children. You know, there's a strong sense that we have to do something, because disproportionately African American males are dropping out of school, not graduating with a high school degree. And as you and I very well know, high school undergraduate degree is very much needed in this telecommunication, that's the 10th institution society in which we live in. So we have to kind of solve that problem. But I propose in this whole issue of trying to get at it, the families, the institution of the family needs to know that at birth, whether you're a grandparent, great-grandparent, uncle, aunt, niece, cousin, you got to do some development from birth to age 2 in thinking about entering into kindergarten. That is very important. It's fundamental, and I think that's where a large gap actually is implemented. When you see those in social classes across all ethnic groups that have successful children, they have done just that. From birth to 2, from 2 to 7, they've been very involved in their educational life, getting them exposed. If you don't come from a family member that plays a piano or a violin or cello, if you expose them early, they can do it. Just like they don't know how to play basketball or football, but you expose them to it, and we excel at it. So if